The Syrian city of Aleppo endures some of the most intense bombing since the country's civil war began. Relief as a baby is pulled alive out of the rubble, but one doctor says over 90 people have died in the government offensive.
Syrian and Russian warplanes carried out more than 150 airstrikes on Aleppo last night, causing so much destruction.
British pilots involved in the military campaign in Syria against so-called Islamic State speak for the first time about their role. With the US and Russia blaming each other for events on the ground, we'll be asking if there's any hope of reviving the ceasefire. Also tonight...
Don't shoot him. He has no weapon.
New footage from the US of the fatal shooting of a black man in Charlotte. His wife is heard telling police he's unarmed. Why the cheetah is now running to survive from illegal wildlife traffickers. And a thrilling end to the county season as Middlesex are crowned champions.
Here, the forgotten workforce, why more people over 50 are looking for jobs in the south than those under 24. And from the flames, a new school. Rebuilding work begins and it's back to class in Selsey.
Good evening. The city of Aleppo in Syria has come under heavy air attack for a second day following an announcement by the Syrian government of a new offensive against rebel-held areas. 250,000 people have been living under siege there. They've been told they can leave at a number of checkpoints, but they must stay away from so-called terrorist positions. The director of one hospital said 91 people were killed today. Talks at the UN have failed to revive a collapsed truce, and this evening Russia and the United States have been trading accusations. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville has the latest and a warning that his report contains some graphic images.
They've grown used to destruction in Aleppo, but never on this scale. This man says a woman was killed here where 3 houses once stood. In the ruins of Syria's ceasefire, eastern Aleppo is being flattened. Here they say they've never heard a louder explosion.
This morning we heard an earthquake. Went out and saw a huge hole in the ground. We thought, my God, what is this? What are we to him? Why does Assad hit us like this? May God have revenge on him, that oppressor.
And when the dust settles, and with a wary eye on the skies overhead, they search for bodies. Here in the dirt, in the doorway of a house, they've spotted the head of a baby boy. The rescue workers have to move quickly before another airstrike. Gently, they take away the stone and the dust, and they have him, and he's alive. The hospitals here are being overwhelmed again. They've lost 6 medical staff over the past 2 days of bombing. Here, a little girl, still in her nappies, is given stitches. She's patched up and sent home, but across eastern Aleppo, they're running short of medical supplies. And tonight the city, again under bombardment, is without water too. In Aleppo, it's not just civilians that are being targeted, but their rescuers as well. Above, the sound of aircraft that have just bombed the Al-Ansari neighbourhood. This is a base for the Civil Defence Force, the White Helmets. 3 of their rescue centres were bombed, 2 completely destroyed.
Syrian and Russian warplanes carried out more than 150 airstrikes on Aleppo last night, causing so much destruction. They're bombing civilian neighborhoods, hospitals are full of wounded, and civil defense is overwhelmed.
This is a city that's suffering to its bones. In Al-Sahin, a father won't let the body of his son, Mohammed, go. Under siege and near breaking point, Aleppo now faces a ground offensive from the regime and its allies. Dozens have been killed in the past 48 hours. We can't say how many because they're still looking for the dead and the missing. The ceasefire didn't achieve peace. It may just have given Russia and regime forces time to regroup and prepare for one final push on Aleppo. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Beirut.
Well, our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins is outside the UN where talks have been taking place all week. And James, is there any hope now for this ceasefire being revived?
It doesn't seem to be much hope, Rita. If we look back over this truly terrible week in Syria, from the American-led airstrikes which killed Syrian troops, the Americans insist accidentally, and they have admitted to it, through the destruction from the air of that UN-organised aid convoy, which the Americans blame the Russians for, but the Russians have consistently denied, to the moment where the Syrians went back on this all-out offensive in Aleppo. It's hard to imagine a worse sequence of events. But I have to say, here in New York, the diplomacy has had terrible failure too. We've seen one of the worst bust-ups between the United States and Russia, who allegedly are working together to try and bring about a ceasefire. The Americans want a full admission by the Russians that they accidentally hit that convoy. The Russians today got their retaliation in. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, made a whole series of accusations against the Americans. He said they'd failed to control rebel forces in Aleppo, and he blamed those rebel forces for hundreds of attacks on Syrian government troops before, as he put it, they were provoked into this new offensive. He accuses the Americans of failing, frankly, to go for the real priority target, which he says is terrorism, the jihadists of al-Nusra and ISIL. So the Russians are very angry with the Americans. That's entirely reciprocated. The Syrian government says there's no prospect of peace talks being revived next month in Geneva, which is a UN hope. So you have to say that this week George Orr has absolutely lost out to war.
OK, James, thank you. Well, the RAF is involved in the military campaign in Syria and in Iraq. The crews have been speaking for the first time about their missions against so-called Islamic State and have revealed that they've come under fire. They've been flying from Akrotiri in Cyprus and have carried out more than 3,000 sorties. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale sent this report.
These are the crews leading Britain's fight against so-called Islamic State. The RAF's already carried out more than 1,000 airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. We watched as they prepared to do more. We can't identify them to protect their security and their families back home.
Well, we know it's a dangerous job, and we know that the threat is there. There's always a sort of feeling of adrenaline as you're about to go and do the job.
They fly missions both day and night from their base in Cyprus, armed with missiles and bombs. They've already dropped more than 2,000. But for the first time, the RAF has also confirmed that their aircraft are getting fired at too by the enemy they call Daesh.
Every aeroplane that flies into those sort of danger areas, and on certain instances, UK aeroplanes have been targeted by Daesh. At no stage has Daesh posed a threat to the aeroplane that's been catastrophic.
I'll be able to continue.
They also have to stay alert as they search for new targets. Each mission can last 7 hours or more. Even above Iraq, the skies are crowded. Over Syria, they also have to keep an eye out for Russian warplanes.
We're flying over northern Iraq where this RAF tanker is refueling British warplanes that are providing close air support to Iraqi troops on the ground, who are pushing now their way forward to Mosul. And we've just seen one of the RAF Tornadoes return, having dropped one of its weapons.
And this is the cockpit video of what that bomb hit. A barge being used to ferry a truck bomb across the Tigris River.
Are you ever worried about mistakes?
You know, we have great amount of trust in our weapons that we use and the success rate, and actually in the training that we've all been given. So it's it'd be too flippant to say it's just a day in the office, but it's what we're trained to do.
In Iraq, the RAF's efforts are now focusing on the liberation of Mosul, an offensive that will begin within weeks.
It's Daesh ISIS' last stronghold in Iraq. They controlled nearly half of Iraq 2 years ago. Now they're down to just 10% and this one remaining city. So we have the very real prospect of them being pushed out of Iraq.
2 years on from the first British airstrikes in Iraq, and there may be signs of progress. But the mission's not over, and defeating IS in Syria will be harder still. Jonathan Beale, BBC News at RAF Akrotiri.
The family of an African-American man who was killed in a shooting by police in the city of Charlotte have released video footage of the confrontation. The distressing images were filmed by the wife of the victim, Keith Lamont Scott, and she can be heard telling officers that he was unarmed and pleading with them not to shoot him. Our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue reports now from Charlotte.
Don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. He has no weapon. He has no weapon.
These are the last moments of Keith Lamont Scott's life.
Don't shoot him! Don't shoot him!
The police can be repeatedly heard telling him to drop the gun.
He doesn't have a gun. He has a TBI. He's not going to do anything to you guys. He just took his medicine.
Telling the officers her husband has a brain injury, she then urges him to cooperate.
Keith, don't let them break the windows. Come on out the car. Keith, don't do it. Keith, get out the car. Keith, don't you do it. Don't you do it. Keith, don't you do it. Did you shoot him? Did you shoot him? Did you shoot him? He better not be dead. He better not be dead. I know that much. I know that much. He better not be dead. I'm not going to come near you. I'm going to record, though.
It's impossible to say here whether he had a gun or not. Anger at the killing erupted onto Charlotte's streets with 2 long nights of violence. That prompted the authorities to call in the National Guard and to impose an overnight curfew. Tensions last night seemed to be easing, but there must now be a fear that tempers will flare again.
There's been no official reaction from police to the release of that shocking footage by the family. For their part, the police are still saying that they will not release the body cam video taken by their own officers at the scene. Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for president, she says they should, and she'll be travelling here on Sunday to see things for herself. Meanwhile, there will be 350 members of the National Guard on Charlotte's streets tonight, and everyone will be hoping for calm. Rita.
Gary, thank you. Gary O'Donoghue there. A convicted killer, Christopher Halliwell, has been told he'll spend the rest of his life in prison after he was found guilty of another murder. Halliwell was found guilty after conducting his own defence. The 53-year-old former taxi driver had led detectives to the body of Becky Godden, a sex worker and heroin addict whom he'd killed in 2003. Detectives say they believe there could be other victims. 2 men have been cleared of raping and killing a British schoolgirl in India 8 years ago. Scarlett Keeling, who was 15, was found dead on a beach in Goa in 2008. She'd been at a beach party while the rest of her family had gone travelling. Her mother, Fiona McEwen, said she was devastated by today's verdict and will appeal. This report from Justin Rowlatt in Goa contains flash photography from the start.
There was chaos as Scarlett Keeling's mother left the Goa court today.
Careful, don't push her down the stairs.
It had taken the judge seconds to end her almost decade-long battle for justice.
I was hoping for a guilty verdict. I didn't have any expectations. I'm still shocked it was so quick.
Her 15-year-old daughter was found dead on a Goa beach in 2008. The police said it was an accident.
One of her sandals was just there.
Her mother has always been convinced it was murder.
So what does it tell you about the police investigation that 2 days later you could find crucial evidence like that just lying in a park?
Well, there just wasn't an investigation at all.
She forced the authorities to perform a second autopsy, which confirmed Scarlett had been attacked before she died and that she'd taken a cocktail of drugs. Today, the 2 men accused of grievous sexual assault and causing Scarlett's death left the court as free men. One, Samson D'Souza, said he'd always been confident of his case.
Did you expect to be acquitted?
Yes.
Yes. No, asking him, not you.
Yeah,
but he's my lawyer, for sure.
Fiona McEwen believes one man is responsible for the case failing. British tourist Michael Mannion was a key witness. This is what he told the BBC 8 years back.
I saw
this Mooley character drive off on his scooter in the light of his front beam of his scooter. I saw Samson D'Souza on top of Scarlett.
But 3 weeks ago, Mr. Mannion decided not to give evidence to the court.
I think he's a despicable coward. He's got no excuse. He lives less than an hour away from London. It was all set up for him. All he had to do was turn up at the Indian Embassy and make a statement.
Fiona says she will always regret letting her 15-year-old daughter stay on the beach on her own.
I've got to live with it, and I will. But at the end of the day, I didn't murder her. Somebody here did, and the responsibility to sort that out lies on the authorities here, and they've let me down and Scarlett down as well.
She says all she wants now is to be back at home in Devon with her other children. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News, Goa.
The illegal trade in animals poses the most immediate threat to some of our most popular wildlife species, according to the head of the CITES Convention. This international group comes together every 3 years to try to save endangered species, including elephants killed for their tusks, rhinos slaughtered for their horns, and baby cheetahs seized from the wild to be used as pets. Our science editor David Shookman reports.
Thin, dehydrated and dangerously ill, these baby cheetahs have just been rescued. They were being shipped in terrible conditions when conservationists saved them. This is a glimpse into a shocking and illegal trade. The cheetah cubs that make it are sold in the rich states of the Gulf. They've become luxury accessories. Their owners boast about them on social media, but the cubs usually die within 2 years, and that's after catastrophic losses on the journey there.
They're probably just thrown into a crate, living in their own feces, traveled for days without proper food, and end up, many of them, dead on arrival.
Cheetahs are the world's fastest land animals, but the cubs are easy targets for poachers, so the numbers are collapsing, as with so many species. To get a sense of how many animals are at risk, we've created this virtual data bank. Each species in trouble has its own file, and the numbers are shocking. Look at this. More than 12,000 different kinds of animal are in some way endangered. Either their habitats are being destroyed, or they're wanted as pets, or for some imaginary medicinal reason. So let's look at a few examples, such as the big cats, the cheetahs we've been hearing about. Back in 1900, there were an estimated 100,000 of them. Now the total is just under 7,000. And what about tigers? Well, a century ago, there were about 100,000. Now they're down to maybe 3,200. And let's check on the lions. In 1950, it's thought there were about 400,000. The total now is as low as 20,000. So what's being done to help? Well, in 1975, the CITES Convention was set up, an international agreement to clamp down on the trade in endangered species. It has progressively tightened controls on exports and imports, and there are some successes. But the underground trade may be worth up to £15 billion a year. Ultimately, all this comes down to whether national governments will act when so many thousands of animals are in danger. So I asked the head of the CITES Convention if it was failing to tackle the illegal wildlife trade.
You're dealing with transnational organised crime. How do you stop that? At international level, it means you start talking to Interpol, UN Office of Drugs and Crime, World Customs Organisation, and that is exactly what we have been doing. And so we're talking about how we're going to scale that up.
But a single cheetah cub can fetch $10,000. A major conference over the next fortnight will try to tighten up the rules for all endangered species, but at a time when demand remains high. David Shookman, BBC News.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has told his critics that they have a duty to unite behind him. He's issued a video message on the eve of the leadership election results, which are almost certain to keep him in power. Let's join our political editor Laura Kunsberg, who's in Liverpool for the party conference for us now. And Laura, victory seems almost confirmed for Jeremy Corbyn, but is the party actually going to heed his message, do you think, to fall in line?
Well, Rita, I think through gritted teeth, probably, for those MPs who've opposed Jeremy Corbyn over such a difficult year for them. Neither Owen Smith, his challenger, nor Jeremy Corbyn will actually know the result until just before noon tomorrow, when they'll be on the stage here in Liverpool. But as Mr Corbyn arrived off the train in Liverpool here tonight, nobody in his team thinks anything else is going to happen other than him be victorious once more. The only thing they're concerned about is the size of his victory. But in terms of what happens next, well, that is much more complicated. But in the next few days, I think MPs will have to at least superficially fall in line, because Jeremy Corbyn will have pulled off an astonishing political achievement, not just once, but again this year, twice, defeating his party's establishment, who didn't want him to be the leader, and expanding and growing the Labour Party's membership, with tens upon tens upon tens upon thousands of new members joining ostensibly just to support him. But long after the victory parties are over and the hangovers of conference have faded, getting the party to unite will be an extremely difficult task, and it will probably require compromise on both sides. I understand within hours of his likely victory tomorrow, Jeremy Corbyn is to launch a major campaign opposing the Tories party to expand grammar schools. That's one of the very few issues in the last 12 months that's actually pulled the Labour Party together. He'll be hoping that that will show his MPs there is a way forward, there are things that they can agree on and actually get themselves together. But on the verge of the result tomorrow, this is still a bitterly and badly divided party. It's not going to be a straightforward few days.
OK, Laura, thank you. And there's a programme bringing you the result of the Labour leadership contest on BBC Two and on the BBC News channel. And that gets underway at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. The Treasury Minister Lord O'Neill has left the government. It's the first ministerial resignation for Theresa May. He was appointed to George Osborne's team last year with responsibility for the Northern Powerhouse project. Lord O'Neill, a former chief economist at the Goldman Sachs Bank, will now sit as a crossbencher in the Lords. The Information Commissioner says some 8 million people in the UK have had their personal information compromised by the hacking attack on the internet company Yahoo. Today, the US firm has been under pressure to explain how data from 500 million customers worldwide had been stolen. Yahoo has described the attack, which happened 2 years ago, as state-sponsored. Our technology correspondent Rory Kethlen-Jones reports.
We're getting used to hacking attacks on big internet names with millions of users affected. Now one of the oldest brands of all has suffered the biggest data breach in history, with details of 500 million accounts stolen. Yahoo says the attack, which took place in 2014, was probably the work of what it calls state-sponsored actors. The UK's data regulator says 8 million people here have been affected.
There is an expectation from the ICO and all the data protection authorities that big organisations like Yahoo have the appropriate security measures in place and stay one step ahead of the hackers.
While any password data stolen was encrypted and should be secure, Yahoo users are still advised to take action.
First and foremost, get into Yahoo if you're a customer, make sure you've changed your password, make sure you enable two-step authentication using your mobile device as receiving an SMS to help you log in, but also if you've reused that password anywhere else, you've got to go and change that password as well. Password reuse is a tried and tested attack vector for criminals.
Yahoo may be an ailing giant, but hundreds of millions have used it to catch up on news, business, weather or sport at one time or another. Email is its most popular feature, and some BT and Sky customers still get their mail from Yahoo. It also owns the photo-sharing service Flickr and the blogging site Tumblr. In July, the firm agreed to sell up to the communications giant Verizon, but that deal still hasn't been completed.
We've seen tremendous growth and engagement.
Yahoo's Marissa Mayer is one of the best-paid bosses in Silicon Valley. She may now face some difficult questions from Verizon.
I think the very first question that Verizon's going to be asking, just like many of the users who were affected, was for how long the company knew about this breach, how long it took for them to respond, and how long it took for them to communicate to users who were affected. And then in addition to that, what they're going to do to prevent this from happening again in the future, because hackers will most certainly try again.
Yahoo has struggled to thrive in the era of the mobile internet. Now its reputation as a competent and secure company has suffered serious damage from this unprecedented data breach. Rory Kethlen-Jones, BBC News.
Middlesex are the county cricket champions for the first time since 1993 after beating Yorkshire by 61 runs at Lord's with just 4 overs of the season left to play. Toby Rowland-Jones took a hat-trick to seal a thrilling victory, as Joe Wilson reports.
When the leaves in St John's Wood tell you it's almost autumn, the champagne has been chilled for long enough. A 6-month county championship of 4-day cricket matches settled only in the final minutes. First, the phony war. Yorkshire bowled balls to be whacked and Middlesex sometimes hit them straight back. Both teams needed to win. Looks odd, it created a target. Middlesex declared and Yorkshire would bat again, needing 240. At Taunton, Somerset's players gathered to watch the telly. A draw at Lord's and the title was theirs. For the first time ever, drinks served, not champagne. At Lord's, Yorkshire sought boundaries, Middlesex wickets. David Willey is an expert slogger. Will he? Won't he? 48 for 3. Tim Bresnan was key. He made 55. Gone. Yorkshire would keep swinging and hoping, but the game really was up.
Bless. Oh, Lord.
Toby Rowland-Jones had taken 2 wickets and 2 balls. Then this. Hat-trick, 178 all out. And at 5:30 on the final day, Middlesex were the champions. Pretty boring, this type of cricket, isn't it? It's not 2020. It's success you must wait for.
This is the club that I've played for since I was 13 years old. A club that I've played 12 seasons of first-class cricket for, and we've not come close to a feeling like this on a cricket pitch.
Well, there's barely any sun left in the day, barely any sun left in the season, but you can see what this trophy means to Middlesex. Well done, skipper.
Thank you.
Now go off and see your fans before they go home. Joe Wilson, BBC News, with Middlesex at Lord's.
That's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.